minutes left, and that's why I talked to her
Okay.
now.
Sure, I'll
We're
do
counting up. Yes.
You're not
The
cool.
space program.
Okay.
Knowing
Call
other.
this a program.
Yes.
Alright. I applied to Belmont University 3 weeks before move-in and committed to Belmont a week before move-in because of a mountain metaphor. And as many of you guys, as I can already see, that kind of sounds crazy and isn't the typical story that you hear. But if I also had to guess, something that you guys do relate to is being in a situation where you really had to trust and where you had to step out and do something that maybe was uncomfortable. And for me, that's what that decision was. But I don't want to talk about Belmont, I'm talking about trust today. And sure, that's a giant abstract and there are so many different directions you can go with that. But I chose it because of the impact it's had on my life and because of how I think trust can lead to growth in so many different areas. And so in order to talk about trust, I understand that first you have to define it. So that's what I'm going to start with, and then I'm going to talk about a few specific aspects of trust and how they've shaped my life and how they shape other aspects of our society and probably your lives too. So first, with defining trust, according to the dictionary, trust is a firm belief in the reliability, truth, ability, or strength of someone or something. This definition implies that you need to have an object of your trust, and so before I started and I explained some of my own experiences, I had to preface the fact that the object of my trust in these examples is my faith and is my faith in God, and that's a giant piece of my life. So I kind of had to give that as a foundation before continuing. So the first kind of trust I really wanted to break down was what I like to refer to as active trust. In my mind, I define active trust as when you have to step into a situation that's uncomfortable. Maybe an opportunity or a risk is presented to you, and you have to actively choose to take that step. The first time that concept kind of became really real to me, or the first example I thought of when preparing this, was my freshman year of high school. As I've briefly mentioned in this class already, middle school and high school were really characterized by some anxiety. And so that year, I was asked to, instead of picking a New Year's resolution, instead of picking some other sort of goal that January, to really focus on a word. And that word was trust. And I had no idea what that meant though, and I ended up on a retreat not long after choosing that word for the year. And on that retreat, so clearly, not in a weird sort of way, not because of some random voice coming out of the sky, I just remember feeling so clearly that in that moment and in that season of my life, trust meaning to step out into the biggest fears I had. And as I said, I had struggled with anxiety, so day-to-day things, going to school, waking up in the morning, those were all really difficult. And so anything that had to do with music, something that I really loved, writing, something that I really loved, was completely off the table in my brain. But musical auditions were coming up, so I showed up. And what I didn't know then, but I know now, is that because of that first step of actively trusting, I was then able to show my parents music I've been writing, then my music teacher, then perform a small recital, and within 5 months of first choosing that word trust to focus on, I got to perform an original song in front of 1,000 people at my church, which here at Belmont maybe doesn't sound like a big deal, but for me at that time especially, I really couldn't have imagined anything more impossible. But trust is not just something in my own life, not only in that experience. Even if you look at business tactics, you can see how you need risk in order to reap a reward. In my research, I was looking at an article all about finance and specifically about risk-free assets, which truly aren't risk-free, and without getting into a bunch of equations and standard deviations and things like that, essentially what they said was that there's a linear relationship between return and risk. So even if you look at other areas of society, you see the importance of trusting in those situations. So I like active trust, and I'm passionate about that because it leads to growth, whether that be personal, financial, or otherwise. The other kind of trust I want to talk about is what I like to call passive trust. And in my definition, passive trust is when you're put in a situation where really your options are trust or don't. That may be tragedy, that may be some sort of hardship. And the first example that came to my mind in this case was over the summer when my cousin passed away super suddenly. She was struggling with drugs that we didn't know about, and that really shook up my family. And so in that situation, really our options were, okay, we're going to trust or we're not. And outside of my own experience too, as I was looking, I found an article called The Importance of Oncologists Giving Hope. And in this article, I read a story of a man named Daniel who had blood cancer. And in this article, the doctor was writing about his experiences with Daniel, and he wrote, "Without hope, I'm sure that Daniel would have given up on life. Unprovable, but I strongly suspect that he would have died much sooner as medical logic dictated." I understand that in that quote, I'm kind of using hope and trust interchangeably, but I think hope is ultimately trusting that good is possible, so that's kind of why I make that connection. So in my own experience, the kind of growth in this passive sort of trust sense that I experienced was this trust and this growth that God would meet me again and again, because that was not the first family death we'd encountered. We had also lost a cousin and several aunts and uncles of mine. And then in Daniel's experience, the trust led to the continuation of his life and helping him through each of those medical procedures. So if you haven't noticed, I'm really passionate about active trust and passive trust because of the growth it can lead to. And I started this speech by talking about Belmont and the fact that kind of ended up here on a whim and definitely an active trust. And I mentioned a mountain metaphor too, which I know I didn't expand on a whole lot, but in case you're not aware, Belmont actually means beautiful mountain, bel meaning beautiful, mont meaning mountain in French. And I'm a very metaphorical thinker, and so the reason I'm passionate about trust is because it's something that we all do, and obviously right now we're all on this metaphorical, beautiful mountain here at Belmont, but I'm also passionate about trust because I know that Belmont's not the last beautiful mountain that any of us are going to have to climb.